It was shortly before Christmas in a quiet suburb of Mansfield, Texas, when police received an emergency call. When they arrived, the officers discovered that the garage door was already open and that the side door to the house was unlocked. As the officers entered the home, they were met with a shocking sight. Rick Wamsley, the well-liked neighborhood accountant, and his lively wife, Susie Wamsley, had been murdered inside their home in the middle of the night. What made the scene even more disturbing was the impression that the murders had taken place some time before the emergency call was made. In addition, the couple's teenage son had disappeared without a trace. This case remains highly controversial. Although many questions were answered, many points still remain unclear. Rick and Susie Wamsley had been best friends when they attended high school together in Oklahoma in the 1970s. At that time, they were also a couple. Many years later, while Rick was studying at Oklahoma State University and Susie was attending a Christian college, they decided to renew their relationship. Soon after, marriage followed, and then the birth of their children. Susie gave birth to their daughter Sarah in 1978, and 6 years later to their son Andrew. Rick earned a degree as a certified public accountant and became successful in the oil and gas industry. Over the years, the family moved several times to support Rick's career development and eventually settled in Fort Worth, Texas. There, Rick opened his own accounting practice from a home office. The Wamsley family moved into a prestigious residential neighborhood. By that time, Sarah was already a young mother and had moved into her own apartment. Andrew, who was 19 years old, had just finished high school and was attending a junior college while combining his studies with a part-time job at a miniature golf course. Rick and Susie had a very happy marriage. In July of 2003, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with close friends and family. In December of that same year, Susie was preparing for what was supposed to be their 25th Christmas together. She decorated the inside and outside of the house. A large Christmas tree stood in the living room, lovingly covered with ornaments, and the presents were wrapped and spread out on the floor around the tree. It was a picturesque scene of a suburban Christmas celebration in Mansfield. That peaceful image lasted only until 11:41 p.m. On December 11th, when a 911 call came in and emergency services, along with investigators, arrived in that quiet neighborhood. At 11:41 p.m. on December 11th, the 911 dispatcher in Mansfield received a call from the Wamsley family home. Nothing could be heard on the other end of the line, except silence. Still, the dispatcher sent police to the house because he felt that something was wrong. Mansfield police officer Patrick Nix was reportedly the first to arrive at the scene. A short time later, his colleagues joined him, and together they examined the property and looked through the windows. Since no one responded when they rang the doorbell, but they noticed that the side door to the garage was open, the officers entered the house. As they walked through the kitchen, they noticed that the landline telephone had been taken off the hook and placed on the kitchen table. In the living room, they found Susie, whose body already felt cold. In the hallway near the door, they found Rick lying in a pool of blood, and it was obvious that he could no longer be saved. Soon afterward, paramedics arrived and confirmed that Susie and Rick were dead. The house was sealed off, and the investigation began. The couple's neighbors were shocked that something like this had happened in their neighborhood and appeared visibly confused and frightened in interviews. They also said that the Wamsleys had been wonderful people, and that they could not understand who could have done something like this. The autopsy showed that Susie had died from a gunshot wound and also had 7 stab wounds. It was believed that those wounds may have been inflicted after she was already dead. Investigators concluded that Susie had been sleeping in the living room, possibly watching television, when she was attacked. On the carpet in front of the fireplace in that room, investigators found 2 bloody handprints that may have belonged to the killer. They also found a bullet, 2 pieces of a broken blue plastic hair clip, and another piece of plastic on the floor nearby. Rick suffered the same fate as his wife, although possibly not as quickly. But bullet holes in the headboard of the bed in the master bedrooms suggested that the attack on Rick began in that room and then moved into the hallway. Because no blood was found in the bedroom, investigators believed that Rick had been awakened by the gunshots and either ran out of the room or possibly tried to attack the intruder there. Everything indicated that Rick had fought back against the attacker. On his left hand and around his wrist was a strand of the attacker's hair, which became a valuable piece of evidence. Rick had also been shot and stabbed in the back about 11 times. Police promised to search every corner of the house thoroughly in order to find the killer. The hair from Rick's wrist and the broken hair clip from the living room floor were taken for DNA analysis. The house was examined for fingerprints, and investigators searched every room. They looked for signs that the Wamsleys had been robbed. One possible theory was that the parents had awakened while trying to scare off a burglar. However, that theory was rejected when almost $15,000 in cash was found in the master bedroom. Even if a burglar had searched the house only superficially, that money would have been easy to find. Other valuables were also untouched, and there were no signs of forced entry on the doors or windows. Long before the tragedy, there had been tension inside the Wamsley family. It emerged that Sarah had been thrown out of the house as a teenager because of her inappropriate behavior, and later became pregnant at 19. She had a difficult relationship with the father of her daughter, a man named Todd Cleveland. She and her younger brother Andrew also argued frequently. Sarah's former boyfriend said that Susie and Rick were suspicious of strangers and believed that some people were interested in them only because they hoped to gain something from the family. In that sense, the family's growing wealth seemed to be more of a burden than an advantage in their lives. According to some reports, the situation at home was tense, although very little of that was visible from the outside. The Wamsleys had an agreement that the parents would financially support their children only if the children completed a college education. This arrangement did not work with Sarah, but Andrew initially agreed to the conditions. He was given a new white Mustang. His insurance was paid. His parents gave him money for expenses, and he continued living in the family home without paying rent. The problem was that he did not keep his side of the agreement. Andrew eventually dropped out of college. When his parents found out, they withdrew their financial support, although they did not go so far as to throw him out of the house. The 19-year-old then began spending most of his time with a group of friends at a local computer club in order to escape the tension at home. There, his friend James introduced him to his 17-year-old sister, Chelsea Richardson. Sarah Wamsley was informed of her parents' deaths early that morning, on the same day they were found. Andrew, however, was initially nowhere to be found. Police then turned to the media and asked the public to report any information about the teenager's whereabouts. While crime scene technicians were still working at the house, the Mustang eventually pulled up in front of the home, and Andrew Wamsley and his girlfriend Chelsea Richardson got out. It turned out that the couple had been staying at Chelsea Holmes' home in the days before the murders, and after seeing the news that morning, they immediately returned to the house. Detective Ralph Standifer asked the young couple to follow him to the police station for an interview. Andrew's questioning lasted about 45 minutes. He explained that he had not been home for several days, had not had contact with his parents, and had spent the entire time with Chelsea. A small scratch was noticed on his hands. Otherwise, however, there was nothing unusual about his behavior, so the officers let him go. Before that, he had agreed to a search of his car. During a conversation with Sarah, Andrew said that investigators would most likely find their mother's blood in the car because she had recently cut her finger and, for some reason, had driven the car around the block. Chelsea's statement matched Andrew's version completely, namely that the two of them had spent the last 2 days together. Andrew and Chelsea had been inseparable since they met in the fall of the previous year and began a relationship. They often spent their days, and sometimes their nights, playing a game called Yu-Gi-Oh!, a Japanese trading card game in which players use cards to battle each other through fantastic monsters. The main character is portrayed as a childish and weak boy who transforms into a hero during the game. The bond between Chelsea and Andrew, formed through their shared passion for this game, became so strong that they even began thinking about marriage. Chelsea's mother supported the relationship and liked Andrew very much. Rick and Susie Wamsley, however, openly expressed disappointment in the relationship. They wanted a very different kind of partner for their son. The Richardson family lived in Everman, a suburb of Fort Worth that was considered a working-class area and stood in sharp contrast to the million-dollar homes lining the streets of Mansfield. Chelsea had experienced the sudden death of her beloved father from a heart attack several years earlier. Her mother sometimes had to work 3 different jobs at the same time in order to keep the family financially afloat. Even so, the Richardsons were considered generous and helpful people. Chelsea was an extroverted young woman and was apparently very popular at her school. Her cheerful personality even earned her the nickname Bubbles. Her best friend, Susanna Toledano, was also considered extremely generous. When Chelsea Richardson had a conflict with her own mother, Susanna was taken into the Richardson home, where she lived for several months. The trio of Susanna, Andrew, and Chelsea were together on the night Andrew's parents were murdered. Chelsea's former boyfriend, Jeremy Lavender, confirmed that the group had been at his home that night. After they said goodbye, he spoke with Chelsea on the phone for several hours and ended the conversation at about 3:20 in the morning. Sarah Wamsley told police that she suspected the father of her daughter, Todd Cleveland, might have had something to do with her parents' fate. Shortly before the murders, she had threatened to take away his custody rights to the child. The two argued frequently about custody. There was also another suspicious incident that had taken place about a month before the murders. In early November, Sarah was driving home from horseback riding lessons with her parents in a Grand Cherokee when they decided to go to a neighboring town to eat. Suddenly, they felt a violent impact on the vehicle. Rick initially thought a large rock had been thrown at the car. But when he stopped to check, the family was shocked to discover that it had not been a rock, but a bullet. There was a bullet hole in the trunk of their vehicle. Frightened and shaken, Susie immediately made 2 phone calls. First, she called her son Andrew. She found it strange that the vehicle that had previously been following them, and from which the shot had apparently been fired, was said to be a white Mustang, and she suspected that Andrew might have been inside it. The second call was to the police to report the incident. Sarah later suggested that Todd might have been responsible for the tragedy, and only afterward remembered the incident with the car. Wondering why her mother had called her younger sons first at that time. Sarah and Andrew were supposed to inherit a life insurance policy from their father worth $1 million. The family home was estimated to be worth about $1.6 million. In addition, there was about $100,000 in cash and other assets that would go to the children. Investigators looked into Sarah's suspicion and eventually removed Todd from the list of suspects. Given the financial motives and the strained family relationships, Sarah and Andrew themselves eventually became the focus of the investigation and were, for a time, considered the main suspects. DNA analysis and fingerprints, however, showed no match to any member of the family. There was no sign that either child was connected to the crime scene. The forensic examination of Andrew's Mustang did confirm that there was blood on the back seat and the headrests. It turned out that the car had been thoroughly cleaned, and investigators' attempts to obtain a usable DNA sample were unsuccessful, so they could not determine whose blood it was. After several months, the investigation stalled. Investigators needed more information and decided to convene a grand jury and issue subpoenas. Jeremy Lavender, Chelsea's former boyfriend, testified under oath that Andrew and his friends had been with him that night, providing them with a strong alibi. Chelsea's best friend Susanna said the same thing. After she testified, Susanna agreed to provide a DNA sample as well, which became a turning point in the investigation. Susanna Toledano was not an unpopular or unsuccessful student. She had moved from Illinois to Texas a few years earlier, was considered a loner at school, often skipped classes, and repeatedly had conflicts with her mother. Chelsea Richardson became Susanna's emotional support. The two became so close that Chelsea dedicated an entire page to her in the school yearbook. She even wrote a poem for her titled, "Friends Forever." When investigators finally determined that the strand of hair found in Rick's hand, as well as DNA from the broken hair clip at the crime scene, matched Susanna's DNA, they realized that there was much more behind the story. Susanna, who could now clearly be linked to the crime scene, was charged with 2 counts of murder, which theoretically carried the death penalty. She was arrested in Chicago, where she was visiting her uncle. Susanna faced a possible death sentence if she did not reach an agreement with prosecutors. At first, Susanna told police that on the night of the murders she had been with a friend, a 25-year-old man named Hilario Cardenas. She said Hilario had a gun and needed money, which was why he entered the Wamsley house alone in the middle of the night while she remained outside. She claimed that she heard gunshots and ran toward the house, and that her hair was left behind after Rick begged her to stop the attack. According to her account, however, she had not actively taken part. She said she could not prevent what happened and was not responsible for it. So who is Hilario Cardona? As it turned out, Hilario was the night manager of the computer club where Andrew and Chelsea regularly spent time. As the father of a young daughter and someone struggling financially, Susanna claimed that Hilario had increased his contact with the Wamsleys after learning about Andrew's family wealth. During questioning, Hilario denied taking part in the murders. He did admit, however, that he had bought a gun for $200 at Andrew Wamsley's request. Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna had wanted to use it for target practice on a friend's farm. Hilario insisted that he had nothing to do with the murders. Investigators looked for confirmation of his statements and decided to visit the owner of the farm where the teenagers had allegedly practiced. The owner, a woman named Ruth Brostrom, knew Chelsea through Chelsea's mother and confirmed the story. A few months before the murders, Chelsea and Susanna had come to the roughly 3-acre property and carried out what they described as target practice, taking turns shooting at a small pond. Ruth had never seen or heard of Hilario Cardona, which further supported his statement. After Hilario also passed a polygraph test, investigators became more confident in his version of events. The pond on Ruth's property was later drained, and forensic specialists collected bullets from the bottom. Eventually, investigators concluded that Hilario had told the truth. The 3 teenagers had practiced their shooting skills for several months in preparation for the murders. Susanna's original story, which blamed Hilario for the killings, did not hold up under closer examination by investigators. But she was given another opportunity to tell the truth, and this time she directly accused her best friend. This time, her account was much more detailed. Night after night, the 3 teenagers had made plans in an internet cafe. They calculated that Andrew would inherit more than $1 million after the death of Rick and Susie, which they believed could be enough to last a lifetime. They wanted to live together. Susanna could quit her low-paying job and buy herself a new car. After they persuaded Hilario to get them a gun, and after they practiced shooting, they concluded that Susanna was the best shot. After that, they began carrying out their first plan. They wanted to shoot the gas tank of Rick's Jeep. They believed the vehicle would explode if they hit it. When Susanna drove past the Jeep with Andrew in his Mustang and fired at it, the Jeep did not explode. They then developed a second plan: to enter the house at night. They assumed it would look like a burglary. After all attempts to make Rick's Jeep explode failed, Susanna said Chelsea became very angry with her. Andrew and Chelsea blamed Susanna for the failure of their first plan and pressured her to finish the job. Once, they took her to the house, hid her with a gun in a closet in Andrew's bedroom, and demanded that she do it quickly so they could go home afterward. Susanna hid in the closet for several hours before coming out again and confessing to Chelsea and Andrew that she could not bring herself to do it. But in the early morning hours of December 11th, they tried again, and this time there was no turning back. Susanna said that she was the last one to enter the house. According to her version, she had the gun, while Andrew and Chelsea were holding knives. It was Susanna who found Susie on the sofa and shot her. After that, Andrew took Susanna into the bedroom, where she fired again at Rick. The bullets struck the headboard of the bed and woke the 46-year-old accountant. After Rick attacked Susanna, a struggle followed. Andrew then took control. He ordered Susanna to check on Susie and to leave the gun there. She obeyed, left the weapon behind, and took a knife. Before she left the hallway, Susanna heard Rick Wamsley, who was on his knees, ask Chelsea why she was doing all of this. Chelsea answered that it was because she was pregnant. Rick then said he would help them. Susanna told police that she did not know which of her two friends had fired the fatal suicide shots at Rick, or who ultimately inflicted the fatal injuries on him. She said she returned to the living room as instructed, so that Susie Wamsley would meet the same fate as her husband. During questioning, Chelsea said she did not understand what was happening and insisted that she was innocent. In exchange for her testimony against Chelsea and Andrew, Susanna Toledano was spared the death penalty, which continued to threaten her two former friends. Within the family, opinions differed. Some believed Andrew could not be a murderer. Others believed that under certain circumstances, any person was capable of anything. The statements of the former friend and roommate eventually formed the basis for the charges against both Chelsea and Andrew. Although Chelsea had repeatedly lied to investigators before settling on a final version of events, she ultimately helped strengthen the case against herself. Many of the prosecution's witnesses in Chelsea's trial were fellow inmates who testified that she had bragged to them about her involvement in the murders, or had tried to persuade them to provide an alibi for her. Her original alibi, provided by Jeremy Lavender, was disproven. Jeremy was described as a young man who was easy to influence and who believed Chelsea was his friend. He had been convinced to lie before the grand jury in order to protect her. Later, he changed his statement and admitted that he had not actually been with the teenagers that night. Chelsea, once a lively high school student, was portrayed as one of the driving forces behind the crime. She convinced Andrew that he would be better off without his family. She also convinced her best friend, who was also easy to influence and manipulate, to act for her. The jury was shown a handwritten note from Chelsea to Susanna, left shortly after Susanna's arrest, in which Chelsea begged her friend to blame Hilario and also claimed that she was pregnant by Andrew. In the note, she wrote, "All you have to tell them is that we had nothing to do with it. Tell them Hilario needed money, and that is why he robbed Andrew's family. If you do not do it for me, then do it for our child, so it has a chance at a life with mommy and daddy." She signed the message with the words, "Friends forever, Bubbles." When Susanna was asked in court whether she believed Chelsea had actually been pregnant, she said no. She knew it was an obvious lie, intended only to manipulate her further. There was no physical evidence directly connecting Chelsea or Andrew to the murders. Susanna's testimony was the only reason to believe that either of them had actively participated in the murders or had even entered the house that night. Still, the former friend's testimony proved decisive for the prosecution, and the jurors ultimately accepted Susanna's account. The jurors in Chelsea's trial needed less than 4 hours to find the 19-year-old woman guilty of murder. Andrew's trial took only about half as long. Chelsea Richardson was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Andrew Wamsley's lawyers, however, managed to convince the jurors not to send him to death row. They argued that he suffered from schizoid personality disorder and, because of that condition, was unlikely to commit violent acts in the future. Defense witnesses described Andrew during sentencing as a sad, emotionally empty person. They portrayed him as a young man who lacked the ability to properly understand love or emotional closeness in human relationships. According to his lawyer, this had been made worse by the fact that no member of his family had ever truly offered him support or guidance. Andrew Wamsley was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 2044. Hilario Cardenas was convicted as a participant in the planning of the crimes because he had witnessed several conversations about the planned murders, even though he was not believed to have actively taken part in the killings themselves. Hilario was convicted of conspiracy to commit capital murder and received a prison sentence of 50 years. Chelsea Richardson, who was considered a central instigator of the crime, spent a little more than 10 years on Texas death row. In early 2012, her legal team succeeded in having the sentence changed to life imprisonment. It was shown that the prosecution had withheld exculpatory evidence from the defense during the original trial. This included a psychological report that concluded that it was not Chelsea, but Susana Toledano who had been the true driving force behind the conspiracy. The report also contained a statement from Susana in which she admitted that she had carried greater responsibility for the crimes than all the other participants, and that she could have prevented the murders. Susana is currently incarcerated in Texas. In the spring of 2034, she will first become eligible for parole. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.